Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are charting a course into, well, maybe the ultimate historical rabbit hole. These continents supposedly swallowed by the sea, holding forgotten wisdom, advanced civilizations. You know the ones.
Oh, yeah. It's this incredibly powerful idea, isn't it? The lost world.
It really is. It feels like more than just a story. It's almost this foundational concept in human curiosity.
I think so, too. This idea of a pre-diluvial paradise,
Yeah.
a golden age that was just suddenly violently snatched away. It taps right into our collective anxieties about, well, civilizational collapse.
Right, and at the same time, it feeds this deep desire we seem to have to discover the source code, maybe, of all human knowledge. Like there was this perfect beginning we lost.
We've got everything from Plato's actual philosophy to really detailed geological surveys,
Yeah.
and then some genuinely out there pseudo-history.
And the goal is to unpack the stories of the two most famous lost continents, Atlantis
The big one.
and Mu. We want to compare their origins, which, let's be honest, often started as fiction or allegory,
Right. That's
with
right.
how they just exploded in popularity later on, becoming part of pseudo-history and generating these modern cultural claims about, remnants still existing today.
Yeah, we really need to figure out what their original purpose was, which, spoiler alert, was often allegorical, not historical.
Mm-hmm.
And then trace how that original point got completely missed or maybe deliberately co-opted and misinterpreted as literal history. It's fascinating how that happens.
It leads to these cultural obsessions, doesn't it? And these incredibly specific, sometimes really surprising claims about finding proof, finding these surviving remnants.
Absolutely. So we're drawing on, the classical text, Plato's dialogues primarily, but also modern archaeological critiques, the hard geological facts,
Yeah.
and, quite extensive works of pseudo-history focusing on both Atlantis and Mu.
Okay, so where do we start? It has to be with the recognized origin point for the whole sunken continent idea, right?
Has to be. We go back to the Greek philosopher Plato, around 360 BC. If you really want to understand why this idea has, well, haunted us for millennia, you absolutely have to start there.
Okay, let's try and unpack this with the kind of clarity that, classicists often demand. Because Atlantis is this global phenomenon now, but its actual appearance in the historical record is, well, it's shockingly limited, isn't it?
It is, and this is the point that really needs to land. Atlantis is first mentioned and only mentioned in two of Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. That's it.
Just those two places.
Just those two. That fact is pretty much the academic consensus, and it's absolutely vital for you, the listener, to internalize this. There are simply zero other surviving records. No Egyptian hieroglyphs mentioning it, no Persian scrolls, no Phoenician logbooks, nothing that speak of Atlantis anywhere in the world that predate Plato's dialogues from around 360 BC.
Wow. Okay.
So for most scholars, that pretty much confirms the story as a literary construct. It's something Plato made up.
And he didn't just invent a place, did he? He invented a whole story around it, and it had a pretty profound political and philosophical agenda behind it.
Exactly. Atlantis, in Plato, isn't a historical account. It's an allegory. It's about the hubris of nations, framed very deliberately as a morality tale.
How does he set it up in the dialogues?
Well, Critias, who's the main narrator of the Atlantis story within the dialogues, he introduces it by claiming it's this genuine ancient account. He says it was handed down through his family and ultimately sourced from wise Egyptian priests.
Ah, the old ancient, unimpeachable source trick.
Precisely. It's a classic literary device Plato uses elsewhere, too. Citing external ancient sources gives the story an air of authenticity, makes it harder to question immediately.
Okay, so what was his goal then? Why invent this specific story?
Well, it seems to serve two immediate functions in the context of the dialogues. First, the whole legend is clearly set up to praise Athens, or rather, an idealized, ancient version of Athens. Atlantis is positioned as its powerful, ultimately corrupt rival.
So Athens looks good by comparison.
Right. And second, it was a way for Plato to demonstrate the political theories he'd already laid out in his major work, The Republic. He wanted to see those ideas in motion, so to speak.
What do you mean in motion?
Well, think about it. Socrates had just finished laying out his concept of the perfect state in the Republic. It's a blueprint, right? But a blueprint is static.
Okay.
So Socrates expresses this wish, basically, to see his ideal citizens animated. Like characters in an animated painting, he says. He wants to see how they would actually behave in a real-world challenge against a truly formidable rival.
And Atlantis is that formidable rival.
Perfectly designed for it. Plato intentionally sets up Atlantis as this powerful, wealthy, technologically advanced counterpoint to his philosophical idealized Athens. It's the ultimate stress test for his political philosophy.
What's really fascinating here, and I think this gets lost a lot, is that the Atlantis in Plato's actual text is basically the opposite of the peaceful, crystal-powered utopia people often imagine today.
Absolutely. That's a much later invention.
So what did the Platonic Atlantis actually look like, according to the source?
According to Plato, or rather Critias recounting the story, Atlantis was defined by its naval and military strength. It was a powerful thalassocracy that means rule by the sea.
Okay.
They were incredibly wealthy materially, technologically sophisticated for their time, militarily mighty. But, and this is the crucial part for Plato's allegory, this very power led directly to their moral decay.
Ah, the hubris.
Exactly. The text implies that the Atlanteans, who were descended partly from the god Poseidon, eventually lost their divine nature. Their human side took over, and they became utterly corrupted by their own boundless wealth, their sophistication, their might. They started unjustly invading their neighbors.
So their destruction wasn't just like random bad luck from an earthquake. It was a direct consequence of their political and ethical failure.
That's the core of the morality tale. It was the ultimate philosophical caution against imperial ambition, unchecked power, and moral decay. The gods, specifically Zeus, decide they need to be punished.
It makes sense. And scholars who study Plato, like Julia Annis, who you mentioned in the sources, they argue that searching for sunken ruins completely misses this philosophical weight, right?
Completely. The whole point of the tale, for someone like Annis, is for examining ideas of government and power. Plato used the structure of historical documents, what he calls an alethonon logon, a true account, in the sense of being plausible and meaningful, to create a narrative that carried profound truth, even if it wasn't literal historical fact, which would be a plastentamathon, a fabricated myth.
So the truth was political, philosophical, not geographical.
Precisely. But, and this is key to why it became so alluring later, to give the story the philosophical weight, he had to provide some really stunning concrete detail.
You didn't just say, oh, there was this powerful island somewhere and it sank.
No. He was incredibly specific about the geography, which is why location becomes so central to the myth's enduring power. Plato explicitly placed the island in the Atlantic Ocean. He describes it as lying in front of the mouth, which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles.
Which we know today as the Straits of Gibraltar.
Exactly. The entrance to the Mediterranean from the Atlantic.
In the size, I mean, that's where the story just gets monumental, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
He claimed it was an island larger than Libya and Asia together. Now, Libya and Asia to the ancient Greeks meant basically North Africa and Anatolia Near East. So we're talking about a landmass potentially the size of a small continent.
That is a staggering piece of geography to just vanish off the map.
It is. And the demise was just as dramatic and just as crucial to the moral of the story. It wasn't a slow decline. Plato says it was destroyed by violent earthquakes and floods happening in a single day and night of misfortune.
One day and night.
One terrible day and night. And it sank into the depths of the sea, which, importantly, subsequently left behind an impassable mud shoal that inhibited navigation in that part of the Atlantic.
So it wasn't just gone, it left this dangerous obstacle.
Right. It's this very physical, very final punctuation mark on their moral failure, utterly destroyed and effectively erased from the navigable world.
So Plato crafts this incredibly detailed, philosophically charged story, a warning about hubris, really. But somehow that story has proven far less enduring than the idea of Atlantis as a literal lost historical fact. How does that shift even happen?
Well, it seems to require a conscious, or maybe sometimes unconscious, decision to just ignore Plato's clear intent.
You have to kind of strip away the philosophy.
Exactly. This Atlantis effect, as we might call it, takes hold when the sheer power of the narrative, the sunken city, the lost golden age, completely overwhelms the, frankly, total lack of actual evidence. So to accept Atlantis as real, as a place you could actually find, you basically have to ignore its purely fictional origin in Plato. You have to ignore the whole philosophical context he built around it. And then, crucially, you often have to start changing all the specific details Plato actually gave you.
Right. That's where that great quote comes in from the writer L. Sprague de Camp. Our sources highlighted it. He made this point about how changing the details makes the symbol meaningless.
Oh, it's the perfect analogy. He said, trying to find a real Atlantis by changing Plato's description is, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, like saying the legendary King Arthur is really Cleopatra.
Okay.
He goes on, All you have to do is to change Cleopatra's sex, nationality, period, temperament, moral character, and other details, and the resemblance becomes obvious.
Ah, it perfectly captures the absurdity,
It
doesn't it?
really does. If you have to move the location from the Atlantic, where Plato put it, maybe into the Mediterranean or the Caribbean or even Antarctica,
Right.
and you have to shrink it from this continent larger than Libya and Asia
Mhm.
down to, say, an island the size of Manhattan,
Mm.
and you change its date from 9,000 years before Solon, which is roughly 9600 BC, to maybe 3,000 years before Christ, and you change its inhabitants from these corrupted, hubristic imperialists into some kind of noble, peaceful utopians.
You're not looking for Plato's Atlantis anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You are searching for your Atlantis. You've created a new myth based on a misunderstanding of the old one.
Okay, so who is the person who really kicked this off? Who institutionalized this search for a literal Atlantis? The sources point strongly to Ignatius L. Donnelly in the 19th century.
Ah, Donnelly, yes. This is really where the pseudo-historical obsession, as we know it today, truly takes flight.
Tell us about him. He sounds like quite a character.
He really was an American politician, a congressman, a writer, and in the 1880s, he published this hugely influential book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. He essentially became the first great Atlantis fundamentalist.
Meaning he took Plato's story literally.
Pretty much, yeah. He firmly believed Plato's story was fundamentally true and factually accurate. He kind of discarded only the most overtly supernatural elements, like Poseidon fathering children. But the core narrative, huge advanced civilization, Atlantic location, catastrophic sinking, he took as gospel.
And what was his big idea?
He was absolutely convinced that Atlantis was the source of all major ancient civilizations. Egypt, the Mayans, the Incas, they all got their culture, their pyramids, their flood myths, their technology, from Atlantean survivors who spread out after the Cataclysm.
The single mother culture theory.
Exactly. And he predicted, with absolute certainty, he wrote that future museums would one day be filled to the brim with actual Atlantean artifacts recovered from the seabed.
A prediction which has clearly not panned out.
Not even slightly.
Mhm.
But his book was an absolute sensation at the time. It influenced everyone from, serious academics who were intrigued, even if unconvinced, to figures like Charles Darwin. Darwin actually received a copy of Donnelly's book.
Really? What did he think?
Apparently he found it interesting, but ultimately unpersuasive, which is probably the right reaction. But Donnelly gave people this grand, unified theory. If you see similarities between distant cultures, pyramids here, flood myths there, it must be because they all descended from one common mother culture, Atlantis. It seemed to explain everything.
Until you run into the actual physical reality of the planet.
Precisely. That's where the idea becomes instantly problematic. Advances in geology and oceanography, especially in the 20th century, provide the ultimate, unavoidable reality check.
Okay, let's talk about the scale problem first. You mentioned Plato's size description. We've mapped the oceans pretty extensively since Donnelly's time, haven't we?
Oh, incredibly so. The geological and geographical impossibility of a literal Platonic Atlantis, that continent-sized landmass, is now considered, well, basically inconceivable by mainstream science.
Why?
Modern oceanography, deep-sea mapping using sonar, satellite altimetry,
Yeah.
especially since the mid-20th century with all the Cold War submarine activity and subsequent scientific exploration, they confirm there's simply no way a landmass larger than Libya and Asia together could have been missed sitting there at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
We know what the seabed looks like.
We really do. We know the shape of the mid-Atlantic ridge, the abyssal plains, the continental shelves. There is no massive submerged continent hiding there, period.
Okay, scale is one issue. What about the mechanism of destruction? Plato talks about this instantaneous sinking. How does that stack up against modern geology?
It flies directly in the face of plate tectonics, which is, the absolute foundation of modern geology.
Right. Continents drift, they collide, mountains rise, but they don't just sink.
Exactly. Plate tectonics tells us the continental crust, which is made of relatively lighter rocks like granite, steel, essentially floats on the denser mantle rock, sima, beneath it. It cannot simply be swallowed whole by the heavier mantle in a geological instant. That's not how buoyancy works.
So maybe a volcanic island could collapse.
Sure, volcanic islands can certainly collapse or erode away over time. Krakatoa, Santorini's, these are examples of catastrophic volcanic events. But an entire continent, thousands of miles across, it does not just submerge in a single day and night. not without leaving absolutely catastrophic, undeniable geological traces that would span thousands of miles across ocean basins, and those traces just aren't there.
Okay, so the original Platonic Atlantis, as described, is geologically impossible.
Pretty much, yes.
But the search for something that matches the myth continues, doesn't it? If you're willing to change Plato's details, like DeCamp said, you can make almost anything fit. So where are people actually looking for Atlantis today?
Oh, the search is truly global now, which just demonstrates how incredibly flexible and adaptable the myth has become once you detach it from Plato's specifics.
So where are some hot spots still in the Atlantic?
Some searches stay within Plato's general area, the Atlantic, near Gibraltar. Popular candidates there include places like the Canary Islands, the Azores, or a specific underwater feature called the Spardal Bank, which is a submerged island or bank right near the straits.
And what does the geology say about those?
Well, detailed geological studies of those Atlantic islands, like the Canaries and Azores, show there are volcanic peaks sitting on oceanic crust. And critically, the evidence suggests these islands have actually been steadily uplifting, rising over the last 4 million years or so. There aren't significant periods of general subsidence or sinking that could account for a lost continent there. Spardal Bank did sink, but it was a small island, not a continent, and it sank gradually due to sea level rise after the last ice age, not catastrophically.
Okay, so if the Atlantic near Gibraltar doesn't quite work, where else? The Mediterranean seems popular.
Very popular. Moving the location inside the Pillars of Heracles into the Mediterranean allows people to link the Atlantis myth to known, historically documented catastrophes in that region.
Like Santorini.
Santorini is the classic example. The massive volcanic eruption there around 1600 BC absolutely devastated the Minoan civilization on Crete and surrounding islands. It caused huge tsunamis. It was a genuinely cataclysmic event, so it's very tempting to say, that was Atlantis.
But it doesn't fit Plato's description, location, size, date.
Not even close. But the imagery is powerful. Other Mediterranean candidates people propose include places like Sardinia, Malta, sometimes even linking the destruction of Troy to some kind of Atlantean-era war. Again, you have to heavily modify Plato.
This brings us up to more recent stuff. There have been some pretty high-profile claims, often getting documentary coverage, linking Atlantis to those marshlands in southern Spain, right? Doñana National Park.
Yes, the Doñana Marshes, which cover the site of the ancient, semi-mythical port city of Tartessos. This became a really compelling modern controversy.
What was the claim there?
Well, a team, notably led by Professor Richard Freund, used ground-penetrating radar and other techniques. They claimed they found possible evidence of structures buried under the marsh, suggesting a large, sophisticated ancient city. They link this to legitimate Spanish geological studies that do show evidence of major tsunamis hitting that coastline in antiquity.
So Freund's team extrapolated from the tsunami evidence.
Yeah, they basically suggested that repeated tsunamis wiped out this major city, and they heavily implied, often quite sensationally in the media, that Tartessos, or perhaps an even older city beneath it, was Plato's Atlantis. They even found these circular memorial cities nearby that they interpreted as copies of the lost capital.
That sounds dramatic, but what was the scientific pushback? Particularly from the Spanish scientists whose original tsunami research they were building on.
Well, the Spanish scientists involved, archaeologists and geologists, they pretty quickly and forcefully pushed back against the sensationalism. They were quite critical.
What did they say?
They basically confirmed, yes, the Doñana area was definitely inhabited thousands of years ago, going back to the Neolithic and Copper Ages, maybe 5,000 years ago. And yes, there's clear evidence of tsunamis impacting the coast. But, and this is the key point, connecting that ancient Iberian settlement, Tartessos, which was known to the Greeks, but definitely inside the Pillars of Heracles, to the colossal pre-Pillars continent-sized empire described by Plato. They essentially said that's just fanciful.
So wishful thinking, basically.
Pretty much. The evidence points to an ancient Iberian settlement, probably Tartessos, that was subject to local sea level changes, river dynamics, and yes, occasional tsunamis. It does not point to the sudden catastrophic sinking of Plato's Atlantis.
Okay, so the story of the search for Atlantis seems to be primarily a story of how we handle inconvenient facts. When science confirms the impossibility of the original tale, the story just gets moved, redefined, shrunk, maybe, until it can be mapped onto some local catastrophe somewhere else.
That's a very good way of putting it. The myth adapts to survive, even if it loses all connection to its source.
All right, so if Atlantis is the great mother myth of the West, originating in Plato's philosophical exercise, we really need to turn our gaze across the globe now to the Pacific Ocean and explore the story of its, well, its conceptual partner, the lost continent of Mu. Okay, so shifting from Atlantis to Mu feels like more than just changing location. It feels like an ideological shift too, doesn't it?
It really does. If Atlantis, at its root, was Plato's somewhat sophisticated cautionary tale about political hubris and moral decay, Mu became something quite different. It evolved into the pseudo-historian's grand answer to the fundamental question of global human origins.
How so?
Mu represents this intense quest for a purer, often explicitly racialized, and definitely anti-evolutionary past. It's less about political philosophy and much more about finding a lost Golden Age motherland.
That's a really crucial distinction. Now, Mu often gets kind of lumped in with Lemuria, right? People use the names almost interchangeably sometimes.
They do, and it causes confusion. Lemuria was actually an older idea, a purely hypothetical land bridge. It was invented by a 19th century zoologist, Philip Sclater, just to explain the strange geographical distribution of lemurs, finding them in Madagascar, but also fossils in India. He needed a land bridge across the Indian Ocean.
So Lemuria was a scientific hypothesis, albeit one later disproven by plate tectonics.
Exactly. But the name Mu itself, well, it has an almost comical origin story that's fully traceable to a specific mistake.
Okay, tell us about the initial blunder. How did the name Mu even come about?
It was born essentially out of a really severe mistranslation back in 1864. There was this French antiquarian, a bit of an eccentric character named Charles-Étienne Brasseur de Bourbourg.
Okay.
He was attempting to translate a Mayan manuscript called the Troano Codex. He was using a notoriously faulty Mayan alphabet that had been recorded, or rather misinterpreted, by the Spanish bishop Diego de Landa centuries earlier.
Uh-oh, using a bad key to translate.
Never ends well. Brasseur misinterpreted a specific glyph, combined it with Landa's faulty alphabet, and believed he read the word Mu, which he claimed referred to a submerged landmass destroyed by catastrophe.
So just based on a mistranslation of one word.
Pretty much. Later on, another figure, Augustus Le Plongeon, another quite controversial figure obsessed with Mayan civilization, he adopted the name Mu from Brasseur and then explicitly identified this supposed sunken Pacific land with Atlantis, effectively linking the two myths together in the popular imagination.
Wow. Okay, so it starts with a translation error and gets conflated with Atlantis. But who really took this idea and ran with it? Who turned Mu from a mistranslated word into this fully formed narrative of a global empire?
That would be James Churchward. He is the true architect of the Mu mythology as we know it.
Tell us about him.
James Churchward was a British-born writer. He claimed to be a colonel, possibly an engineer, maybe a soldier.
Yeah.
His background's a little murky, but he popularized Mu in a whole series of hugely influential books, starting with Lost Continent of Mu, the Motherland of Man, which came out in 1926.
Motherland of Man, that title says a lot.
It really does. This is where the story of Mu gets all its rich detail, its specific geography, its history, its philosophy, and ultimately its power to persuade people.
Okay, let's dig into his source of knowledge, because the story he tells about how he learned about Mu is, well, it's a narrative masterpiece in itself, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's designed to be completely captivating and almost impossible to verify. Churchward claimed that while he was serving in India sometime in the late 19th century, more than 50 years ago, as he put it, he befriended a high-ranking Hindu temple priest, a rishi.
Okay, a wise priest in India.
Right. And this priest, conveniently, was supposedly one of only 2 or 3 people left in India who could understand a long-lost sacred language. Churchward claimed he persuaded this priest to teach him the language.
Sounds convenient.
Extremely. And then the priest, seeing Churchward's genuine interest, supposedly showed him a secret cache of ancient clay tablets hidden deep within the temple vaults. These tablets were described as being sunburnt, baked by the sun, presumably.
And what language were they in?
They were allegedly written in what Churchward called the Nagamaya language. This was, he claimed, the original language of mankind, originating from Mu. And these tablets supposedly detail the entire 200,000-year history of the human race and, critically, the existence, flourishing, and destruction of the lost continent of Mu.
So, let me get this straight. His entire vast thesis about Mu rests on him, supposedly, learning a completely dead, otherwise unknown language from one single anonymous priest in India, who then showed him these unique ancient tablets, which, of course, are completely unavailable for anyone else to study or verify today.
You got it. It is the perfect, unverifiable origin story for a pseudo-historical claim. It relies entirely on his personal testimony about secret knowledge revealed only to him.
Classic. Okay, so based on these supposed tablets, what did Churchward actually claim about Mu's geography and history? The scale sounds immense.
Oh, the claims are just staggering in their scale. He placed Mu squarely in the Pacific Ocean. He said it stretched east-west, all the way from the Marianas Islands near Asia, across to Easter Island near South America.
Wow, that's most of the Pacific.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And north-south, he claimed it went from Hawaii all the way down to Mangaia in the Cook Islands.
Okay, what kind of landmass size are we talking about here? Give us a comparison.
Churchward explicitly claimed Mu measured roughly 5,000 miles from east to west and 3,000 miles from north to south. That makes it significantly larger than the entire continent of South America.
Larger than South America,
Yeah.
in the middle of the Pacific.
Okay. And this wasn't just some empty landmass. According to Churchward, Mu was the original site of mankind's appearance on Earth. It was the true Garden of Eden. It supposedly flourished maybe 50,000 years ago with a huge population. He estimated 64 million inhabitants, organized into 10 distinct tribes. And this wasn't some primitive society. It represented a highly advanced Golden Age civilization, far superior to anything that came later.
64 million people, 50,000 years ago. That's ambitious.
Deeply ambitious. And the mechanism of its destruction is also quite different from Plato's earthquakes and flood scenario for Atlantis. Churchward needed something truly spectacular to wipe out a continent of that size.
What did he propose?
He needed a geological cataclysm of unprecedented scale. In Churchward's account, Mu was utterly obliterated, sunk beneath the waves in almost a single night, about 12,000 years ago.
Okay, how? What was the mechanism?
His explanation was creative. He claimed the island continent of Mu was geologically unusual. It was composed mainly of granite, but it sat on top of massive, hollow subterranean chambers. These chambers were supposedly filled with highly explosive volcanic gases, kept under immense pressure. Then, due to tectonic shifts or maybe other unknown forces, these huge granite gas chambers beneath the continent catastrophically imploded. The entire landmass essentially crumbled inwards and sank into the abyss, leaving only scattered island peaks behind.
Right. That 12,000-year timestamp for the destruction, about 10,000 BC, that sounds significant, doesn't it? It pops up a lot in these kinds of theories.
It absolutely does, and it's almost certainly intentional. That timing connects the destruction of Mu directly to the Younger Dryas boundary event.
Explain that again quickly.
The Younger Dryas period, which happened roughly between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago, was a geological moment of very sudden, very dramatic return to near-glacial cold conditions across much of the globe, right after the initial warming trend at the end of the last ice age. It marks a period of massive, rapid climate instability, sea level changes, and large mammal extinctions.
So for mainstream science, it's a major climate event.
Right, a sudden cooling, likely triggered by meltwater disrupting ocean currents, or possibly an extraterrestrial impact, though that's debated. But for many pseudo-historians and alternative history proponents, the Younger Dryas boundary is the moment. It's the time of the Great Flood, or the cosmic impact that wiped out a lost civilization, or, in Churchward's specific case, the precise time the great Motherland of Mu was destroyed. It gives his story a veneer of scientific plausibility by linking it to a real, known period of global upheaval.
Got it. And underlying all this dramatic geology and geography, you mentioned there's Churchward's core philosophy, his fundamentally anti-evolutionary view of human history.
Yes, absolutely central to his entire project. He championed a concept he called involution, which is the opposite of evolution.
As is there.
Well, traditional anthropology and archaeology see a general progression, right? From technologically simpler Paleolithic, Old Stone Age hunter-gatherer cultures to more complex Neolithic, New Stone Age farming cultures, and then onto Middle Ages and civilizations.
Right. Building complexity over time.
Churchward completely inverted this. He claimed that the ancient Paleolithic men, the original inhabitants of Mu, belonged to a vastly superior civilization. They had advanced science, spirituality, global travel, the works.
So later cultures were worse.
Exactly. In his view, the subsequent cultures we find in the archaeological record, like the Neolithic groups or even later historical civilizations, were simply degenerate descendants. They were the scattered, traumatized survivors who had forgotten most of the advanced wisdom and technology of the motherland. History, for Churchward, wasn't a story of progress. It was a long, slow decline from a lost golden age. Involution, not evolution.
Okay, so the real genius, maybe, of the Mu myth and why it became so influential lies in how Churchward connected it to all these existing mysteries around the world. Mu wasn't just some isolated sunken island. He positioned it as the literal motherland.
Precisely. It was the common point of origin, he claimed, for all the great ancient civilizations we know: Egypt, the Maya, ancient India, Babylon, you name it. They were all just colonies or offshoots of Mu.
And things like megalithic architecture pyramids, giant stone
All
structures.
came from Mu, according to Churchward. The knowledge, the technology, the architectural style was all developed first in the motherland and then spread globally by its colonists.
How did this knowledge supposedly spread? Who were the carriers?
To explain this global diffusion of civilization, Churchward introduced a specific group, the Neanderthals, which he translated as the Sacred Brothers or Holy
Or
Brothers.
the Nakals. Okay.
These were essentially the missionary colonizers from Mu, highly enlightened priests and scientists who supposedly spread out from the motherland as early as 70,000 years ago, he claimed, establishing colonies and teaching the primitive peoples of the world the wisdom, religion, and science of Mu.
70,000 years ago. Okay, now this is where we run headlong into the really controversial but absolutely integral racial claims embedded within the Mu narrative, isn't it?
Yes, it's unavoidable and central to Churchward's thesis, reflecting common racial theories of his time. According to the secret texts Churchward claimed to have read, the dominant race in Mu, the race that developed this high civilization, was explicitly described as being white.
How did he describe them?
He wrote, they were an extremely beautiful people, with typically white or olive complexions, straight black hair, and large, soft, dark eyes. This specific racial element is absolutely key to how he then linked Mu's supposed superiority to various mythologies found later, particularly in the Americas.
Ah, right. Because this connects immediately to those persistent, often problematic indigenous traditions found throughout the Americas concerning white gods or fair-skinned civilizers.
Exactly. Traditions like Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Viracocha in the Andes,
Mhm.
these figures are often described in myths, or interpreted by later commentators, as being light-skinned, sometimes bearded, arriving from the sea, teaching civilization, and then departing.
And Churchward seized on these.
Absolutely. He explicitly linked the common Mesoamerican traditions about an earlier white race that supposedly colonized land first before being perhaps expelled or absorbed by a darker race, like the Mayans or Aztecs, directly back to Mu. He saw Quetzalcoatl not as a native deity or culture hero, but as a Neanderthal king from Mu.
And he dated this incredibly early, didn't he?
Ludicrously early. He dated Quetzalcoatl's reign in Mexico to more than 34,000 years ago, long, long before any recognized indigenous empire or civilization existed according to mainstream archaeology. This extreme antiquity served to reinforce his idea of this primordial, superior, white civilizing element originating from Mu, predating all other known cultures.
Okay, so that's the broad theory. The sources you provided go into some really extensive detail, specifically on the connection Churchward and his followers drew between Mu's traditions and the culture of the Araucanian people, the Mapuche in Chile, or Chilimapu as the source calls it. They claim there are really striking, precise analogies there.
Yes, this Araucanian connection is presented as particularly strong evidence, supposedly corroborating Churchward's claims independently. It's fascinating because it suggests his grand global thesis found this specific, powerful resonance or perceived resonance in South American indigenous traditions.
What are some of the specific parallels drawn?
Well, for instance, the source highlights the Araucanian flood myth. It's called the Triple Afquin, which apparently means something like the risen water or the flood. This myth, which involves the destruction of the land and ancestors seeking refuge on high mountain peaks that rose as the water surged, is presented as directly mirroring the great catastrophe that supposedly destroyed Mu.
Okay, a parallel flood myth. What about the civilizers, the Nayakals? Do they have a counterpart?
They do, according to this interpretation. The Nayakals, Mu's enlightened sacred brothers, are directly compared to figures from Araucanian tradition, the Penyi Epatun, which translates as the Epatun brothers, or sometimes the Lidushis, meaning the first men or the originators.
And what was their role?
These figures, like the Nayakals, were seen as the ancient patriarchs who survived the Great Flood and were tasked with preserving the ancestral wisdom and rebuilding civilization afterwards. So the parallel structure, global catastrophe, followed by preservation of knowledge by enlightened figures, is presented as a direct link, suggesting a common, deep ancestral source, Mu, for both traditions.
What really stands out in the source material, though, is the way it uses historical testimonies from early European chroniclers in South America to try and substantiate this idea of an ancient, superior, possibly white race existing there before or alongside the main indigenous populations.
Yes, this is a classic technique used in constructing these kinds of alternative histories. You take actual historical observations, which themselves are often filtered through the cultural biases and expectations of the European observers, and then you reinterpret them through the predetermined lens of your theory, in this case, the lost white race from Mu.
Can you give some examples from the Chilean context mentioned?
Sure. The source quotes Pedro de Valdivia, the Spanish conquistador, writing back to Emperor Charles V in 1551. He describes some of the native peoples he encountered in Chile as being tall, domestic and friendly, and white and with lucid faces.
White. That's a loaded term.
Extremely. And likely relative. Then there's Alonso de Ercilla y Zúñiga, who wrote the epic poem La Araucana. In 1574, he similarly describes some Araucanians as being white, ready in stout proportion, contrasting them with other groups.
And this continues later on.
Apparently so. The source also mentions Juan Ignacio Molina, a Chilean Jesuit priest and naturalist, writing in 1776. He even described a specific subgroup or tribe living in Boroa, near La Imperial, who were supposedly distinctively white and even blonde, and who he claimed had largely avoided mixing with the surrounding indigenous population.
Okay, so how do followers of Churchward use these scattered historical mentions?
They weave them together into a narrative. These multiple, disparate accounts of white Indians, encountered by Europeans over several centuries, are used to reinforce the core theory that the main indigenous groups the Spanish met were in fact just a later immigrant population. They supposedly superimpose themselves onto an older, superior, white civilizing substratum that had originated in Mu and colonized Chile in deep antiquity. The white Indians were the remnants.
It's a compelling narrative structure, isn't it? Not necessarily because it's historically accurate, but because it cleverly draws together mythology, the flood, the civilizers, specific historical anecdotes, the chronicler's descriptions, and this underlying racial ideology, the superior white race from Mu.
Exactly. It creates a seemingly coherent, alternative picture of the past.
Okay. Beyond the people and the history, let's look at the literal calling cards, the specific universal symbols that Mu supposedly transmitted across the world, leaving its fingerprints everywhere.
Right. Churchward identified two major symbols in particular, claiming they were Mu's indelible signatures, found globally but especially prominent, he argued, in the Americas, linking them back to the motherland.
Let's start with the first one, which is probably the most controversial today. The swastika, or the tetraskelion as it's sometimes called.
Yes. Churchward made a big deal of the swastika. He interpreted it not in its later specific political or religious context, but as the original universal emblem representing the four great primary forces of creation. These were, in his cosmology, the celestial builders or geometers or architects who constructed the universe and the earth under the direction of the Creator.
So a symbol of cosmic creation.
Yes, and he also tied its four-armed quadrilateral shape to the original symbol for Earth itself. He claimed its clockwise or counterclockwise orientation indicated different aspects of these forces.
And how did this supposedly manifest in the Araucanian context in Chile, according to the source?
The source claims this symbol is found prominently in Chile. It appears as the sun in motion, salvastiva, painted on the Mapuche shamanic drum, the kultrun. This drum is central to their cosmology and rituals. The symbol is also apparently repeated in ancient geoglyphs, large ground drawings, and petroglyphs, rock carvings found throughout the region.
And Churchward saw this as proof of Mu.
For Churchward and his followers, the presence and evolution of this symbol starting as four independent forces, then uniting to form a cross, representing the four great builders working in unison, revealed its deep, secret, occult meaning related to cosmic creation. This was knowledge, they argued, originally taught by the Neakal missionaries from Mu.
Okay, what's the second major symbol? The one perhaps even more proprietary to Mu's supposed royal lineage.
That would be what Churchward called the royal shield of Mu. This is a very distinctive eight-pointed star emblem.
An eight-pointed star.
Yes. And this, he claimed, specifically symbolized the empire of the sun, which was his term for the global empire ruled from Mu. He even claimed he had fully decoded its meaning directly from those Nagamaya tablets he supposedly saw.
How did he decode it?
According to him, the central figure, or glyph within the star, reads, the empire of. The circle surrounding that central figure represents the sun, which he read as Ra, linking it to Egypt. And the 8 radiating rays symbolize Mu's dominion over the entire earth, reaching out to all corners. It was effectively their royal coat of arms proclaiming global rule.
That's quite specific. And the sources claim this symbol also pops up across the Pacific and the Americas, linking back to Mu.
Absolutely. The source material provides examples. It mentions this eight-pointed star symbol appearing, for instance, on the ceremonial fan held by a figure identified as Princess Arawali in the Gilbert Islands. Kiribati. It's also shown decorating the dress of a Kootenai indigenous woman in British Columbia, North America.
But the strongest link is claimed back to the Araucanians again.
Yes, specifically the source highlights its appearance on the clava, which is a traditional Mapuche warrior staff or ceremonial mace, often seen as a symbol of authority. There, the eight-pointed star is referred to as the Venusian solar emblem, with the names Yefun Oyowen.
Venusian solar, why Venus?
That connection is presented as highly significant. Venus, the morning and evening star, is often metaphorically referred to as the star that arrives first, heralding the sun. This provides a perfect symbolic link, the source argues, to the concept of the Antupanco, a term supposedly meaning the children of the sun or the splendor of the sun.
So the star connects to Venus, which connects to the sun children.
Exactly. And this reinforces the whole narrative that Mu's royal lineage, these solar Venusian figures often equated with the white gods like Viracocha or Quetzalcoatl, were the original enlightened civilizers of South America, descended from the Empire of the Sun. It's this intricate, interwoven structure of symbols, myths, and supposed historical traces that makes the Mu narrative so compelling and seemingly coherent to those who are looking for this kind of unified, ancient, superior origin story for global civilization.
Okay, so after diving deep into these really spectacular, detailed claims about both Atlantis and Mu, we do have to kind of pull back and land on solid ground again. Scientifically speaking, both concepts, these giant sunken continents, are fundamentally contradicted by modern geology, aren't they?
They are. We already established pretty clearly why a Platonic Atlantis, that continent larger than Libya and Asia in the Atlantic, is geologically impossible due to plate tectonics and our knowledge of the ocean floor.
Right.
And exactly the same geological reality applies to Churchward's Mu, a continent 5,000 by 3,000 miles, supposedly made of lighter continental rock like granite, simply cannot vanish into the Pacific Basin in a single night, or even over millennia. It defies the basic principles of isostasy and plate tectonics.
What about those specific islands that Churchward claimed were the last remaining mountain peaks of Mu, like Easter Island or Hawaii?
Well, geologists have studied these islands extensively. They confirm that islands like Easter Island, Hawaii, Fiji, Tahiti, they are classic examples of isolated volcanic hotspots or islands formed along tectonic plate boundaries in the Pacific. They rise from the deep oceanic crust.
So they're not connected to some underlying continent?
No, they are not the exposed mountaintops of a vast, sunken continental landmass. There's no submerged continent beneath them.
And does the archaeology on islands like Easter Island support or contradict the Mu story?
It strongly contradicts it. Take Easter Island, Rapa Nui, with its iconic Moai statues. Churchward claimed it was just a tiny remnant of Mu. But the archaeological evidence, particularly the placement of the large stone platforms, the Ahu, on which many Moai originally stood.
Where are they located?
They are heavily concentrated right along the island's current coastline. If Easter Island were just one small mountain peak sticking out of a massive continent that has sunk, you'd expect to find these major ceremonial sites widely dispersed across the island, including far inland, representing the coastline or centers of the original landmass.
But they're not.
No, they hug the existing shores. This strongly indicates that the island's basic geography hasn't changed dramatically since those monuments were built, probably between 1200 and 1500 AD. The people who built them were living on the island pretty much as we see it today, not on the edge of a sinking continent.
Okay, so if the science is so definitive against both Atlantis and Mu as literal sunken continents, why? Why does this fictional history endure so powerfully? Why did Plato even invent Atlantis in the first place? And why do we seem compelled to keep looking for it, or for Mu?
I think it circles right back to Plato's original, quite ingenious literary technique. He deliberately used the trappings of historical recounting, citing supposed ancient Egyptian records. Critias claiming it's a family story passed down to grant his philosophical allegory the weight of authenticity.
To make it feel real, even if it wasn't. That Alethanon Logon idea again.
Exactly. That plausible narrative structure. This strategy allows the audience, his original Greek audience, and us today, to seriously consider the profound political and ethical truth he wants to explore without getting immediately bogged down in arguments about, say, current Athenian politics or recent history.
And setting it in the remote past is key to that, isn't it?
Absolutely key. Plato understood, I think, that our sheer ignorance of the distant past creates a space for possibility. We are much more willing to suspend disbelief, as Coleridge would later call it, about spectacular events like the rise and fall of a vast, powerful empire overnight if we believe they happened long, long ago before reliable, verifiable records began.
It makes the philosophical experiment possible.
Yes, if the perfect city, ancient Athens, or the corrupt city, Atlantis, could be instantiated way back then, it makes them more powerful as models, as warnings, or as ideals for understanding the present.
And this powerful philosophical device, this template for talking about ideal or corrupt societies through a lost world narrative, it didn't just stay confined to philosophy departments, did it? It became a recurring theme, a template for subsequent utopian and dystopian writing.
Oh, absolutely. It had a huge legacy. The idea of an ideal civilization, often located on a remote island, was famously picked up by Sir Francis Bacon in his unfinished work, New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1627. Bacon used the mythic structure to describe his vision of an ideal society completely dedicated to scientific discovery and progress, Solomon's house.
Right, and later literature continued to use the myth.
Definitely. Later literary works, like the epic poem L'Atlantida by the Catalan poet Jacint Verdaguer in the 19th century, used the Atlantis myth to explore grand themes of lost worlds, divine punishment, and the potential for new beginnings. Verdaguer's poem, interestingly, is even said to have partly inspired Christopher Columbus, or at least reinforced his belief in lands across the Atlantic.
Wow. And it wasn't just literature or philosophy. On a darker, more geopolitical note, the sources you brought highlight that these narratives of lost, superior ancestral homelands like Atlantis or Mu were also disturbingly co-opted by totalitarian regimes in the 20th century.
Yes, that's an important and chilling aspect of their legacy. The narrative of an ancient, powerful, often racially pure foundational civilization like Mu or Atlantis proved deeply appealing to ideologies seeking historical validation for their own, often violent and expansionist projects.
How so?
Well, we know, for instance, that certain circles within Nazi occultism, like Heinrich Himmler's Energie Institute, were quite obsessed with finding archaeological or mythological proof of the origins of a pure Aryan race. They explored theories linking this superior race to lost lands like Atlantis or Thule, seeking a pre-Christian, heroic past to justify their ideology.
And it wasn't just the Nazis.
No. The sources also mention, for example, that in Turkey, the founder of the modern republic, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, was apparently quite interested in James Churchward's theories about Mu.
Really? Wow.
Ataturk was trying to establish a new, secular Turkish national identity, distinct from the Ottoman past and rooted in deep ancient history. He was looking for connections between Turks and other ancient civilizations. Mu, as the supposed motherland of man that seeded global cultures, including potentially Central Asian ones, offered a tantalizing, if completely fictional, link to a prestigious primordial origin for Turkish civilization, bypassing Greek, Roman, or Islamic influences.
It's just fascinating how these myths constantly adapt, isn't it? For Plato, Atlantis is a warning against imperial corruption. For Churchward, Mu is a justification for a very specific racial and anti-evolutionary historical hierarchy. And then for modern states or political movements, these same myths can become these powerful, potent, even if entirely fictional tools for constructing national origin stories or validating ideologies.
They are incredibly malleable, reflecting the anxieties and aspirations of whoever deploys them. #outro.
Okay, so after all this, what does it all mean for us today? For you, the listener, sitting here wading through this massive stack of often contradictory sources with us, the deep dive, it seems, isn't really into the seabed looking for ruins, is it?
No, I think you're right. It's really a deep dive into the structure of human belief itself, into ideology, into how we construct meaning about our past.
These narratives, Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, all these lost worlds, they seem to be far less about actual physical geography and much more about our internal ideological geography. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. They reflect this collective, maybe universal human yearning. It's this deep desire to imagine a superior past a golden age. Maybe it's an age we feel we need to strive to return to, or perhaps more profoundly, maybe it's a lost civilization that serves as a template, either for what we should aspire to, or maybe what we should fear having fallen from.
It feels like when the hard, verifiable evidence runs out, which it does very quickly with these topics, these incredibly compelling, often highly detailed narratives just rush in to fill that vacuum.
They absolutely do. And in doing so, they shape how we think about our own origins, don't they? How we view the whole trajectory of human civilization, and maybe even, subtly, how we think about our political future. The very persistence of these myths, despite all the evidence against them, tells us infinitely more about the human condition, our hopes, our fears, our need for meaning, than it could ever tell us about the actual depths of the ocean floor.
That feels like a really good synthesis.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, let's leave you, our listener, with that final provocative thought. Something to maybe mull over as you reflect on these fascinating, enduring stories of sunken worlds.
All right. Consider this. Plato defined his Atlantis as this incredibly technologically advanced, militarily dominant, globally ambitious,
Yeah.
yet ultimately morally corrupt thalassocracy.
Right.
James Churchward, on the other hand, defined his Mu as this immensely powerful, spiritually advanced, utopian motherland of man, the source of all good things.
Two very different visions of a lost super civilization.
Very different. Yet both, despite their immense power, their vast knowledge, their global reach, whether corrupt or utopian, were supposedly completely erased from the face of the earth almost instantaneously in a single day and night of overwhelming catastrophe.
Well, annihilation.
Total. So what does that core implication, that sudden, absolute, and seemingly complete erasure of even the most powerful civilizations imaginable, suggest about the permanence or maybe the impermanence of our own power structures, our own knowledge base, our own civilization today? Things which we often assume, perhaps complacently, are absolutely indelible, built to last forever.
That's a chilling thought.
Maybe the continuous, obsessive search for what was lost out there in the ocean or in the distant past ultimately reflects a fundamental, perhaps unspoken human terror of what we, right here, right now, could potentially lose. And maybe, just maybe, it reflects a quiet, unsettling understanding that the ultimate fate of any powerful civilization, whether we deem it utopian or corrupt, might just be to eventually become nothing more than a ghost story, a myth whispered about by those who come after.